Okay, everybody, this is part 3 of our lesson for this week. Okay, so we're back to the syllabus, course materials, and major assignments section of our Moodle page. And the next text that we're going to look at is a little bit difficult to read. Okay, so we're going to go there and we're going to talk about why it's a little bit difficult to read. And if you can read it, I want you to sound out the words and read it out loud because it's easier to understand when you're actually saying the words versus when you're trying to read them. Okay, so, but let's take a look at this here and get an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is an article called The State of Pidgin Address, and it is written in Hawaiian Pidgin. So, what is Hawaiian Pidgin? It's a type of English, it's a dialect of English that is kind of like a conglomerate of all the languages that are part of the Hawaiian Islands. So, if you've been to or if you've lived in Hawaii before, you've probably heard this dialect before. And there are a lot of words where the the end of a word is kind of left off. But if you think about things like the New York accent or the Boston accent, right? Where instead of like together, we say together, right? So you're chopping off the R and ending in with an A. So a lot of Pidgin is kind of similar to that, even though it's halfway across the globe, right? But it's because when you have a specific insular area, that has a lot of different people speaking a lot of different languages and everybody trying to communicate with each other, you develop a version of the English language that's specific to where you are, right? And that's what this is. And this article is written phonetically, meaning, all the words are written the way that they're said in Hawaiian Pidgin. Okay. I encourage you to read the entire thing. Okay. It's a little bit difficult for some people, and I get that, and that's okay. Just try your best. Okay. Try your best. But what I really want you to look at here, and there's a highlighted section that I want you to read through. Okay. And it's this section, this poem that Lee Tonouchi wrote with his students, right? He asked his students all of the things that they thought they couldn't do if they spoke Hawaiian Pidgin, okay? And they compiled this list. So this is part of that list. And I also want you to try and read this section here, okay, which is a couple of paragraphs after and the short paragraph before the poem. So that's the most important part, okay? And I want you to try and read that. But before you do that, here's a little bit of help. So the reason why this is not in an accessible font, number one, because it only comes in a PDF, right? So it's really hard to cut and paste stuff from a PDF and re-upload it. So what we have here instead is a video of Lee Tonouchi himself reading that poem that's highlighted in the State of Pidgin Address, okay? So he's doing a poetry reading and a book reading, and he reads this poem. There are parts of it that are slightly different, but you get the main idea, okay? And the section that you need to absolutely have listened to is from 1 minute and 57 seconds to 3 minutes and 34 seconds, right? And it is actually, I think it's a little bit more, but you get through the entire poem. Um, and he reads through the poem, right? He gets through the poem, and you're able to hear how it sounds. It doesn't sound that strange when he's saying it, right? It looks stranger on paper. And if you can't read it on the page, you can get a better idea of what he's referring to here. Okay. So, actually, even if you don't have issues reading regular text or whatnot, I would suggest that you read both, or that you actually watch and listen to and read both of them. Okay. So, but also I encourage you to think about your own accent. And I'm going to stress this, and I don't impose an idea very often unless it's really, really important. And it's important to understand that every single one of us, right, myself included, every one of you has an accent, right? Every one of you has a dialect. Every one of us, where we come from, there's a style, a version, a dialect of English that is different from other parts of the United States. And we sound differently. We don't think that we sound like we have an accent. Nobody ever thinks that they sound like they have an accent until you listen to yourself next to someone else, or until you listen to a recording of yourself and you think, wow, I really do have an accent. I have a New Jersey, New York accent, right? It's a little bit milder than it used to be, but it's definitely there, right? And wherever you came from, that's the origin of your accent. So the only answer that's really unacceptable when we're talking about code switching, and when we're talking about dialects and accents and things like that, is that, oh, I don't have an accent. You do. Everyone does. I do. There's no exception, right? There's really no exception. Everybody's got one. Okay. So I want you to think about this and think about your accent, and think about how your accent sounds to someone else when you listen to Lee Toneuchi's reading, okay, and when you try to read it yourself. And I also want you to think about this thing that we call language hierarchy, right? So what he's talking about students who think they can't do certain things because they speak Hawaiian Pidgin, right? So the idea here is that we're not prioritizing anybody's accent. We're not prioritizing anybody's dialect. And we're trying to do away with the idea that just because you have an accent, right, that you're not smart, or you're not worthy, or you're, not able to learn, or not intelligent, right? And that idea has kind of been, you know, propagated throughout the United States, right? Think about yourself, okay? And from wherever you are, people from the Northeast, think about all of the times that somebody thought you weren't nice because you're from Massachusetts. Maybe you're, a quote unquote masshole, right? Or you're from New York or New Jersey, right? And you're not a very nice person because you're from New York or New Jersey. Or maybe you're from the South, and you've gone up north, and somebody assumed that you weren't smart because of your Southern accent, right? Or, maybe you have like a West Virginia accent, and someone assumed that you weren't smart because you're from the Appalachian Mountains, right? So think about that when you think about Lee Toneuchi reading this poem, because everyone is subject to language hierarchy from one way or another, okay? And we're all judged by how we sound, right? So, and think about what that means and how that affected you, Okay, so, and we're going to be thinking about that and writing about that in the forums to come.